very much for joining us here today. This is Paul Taubman with 9.Connects. You are in the right place today if you are here for our webinar on database library flow. And I know that we gave it one particular name when we were doing the announcement over there, primarily Catch Your Eye, but in the last couple of weeks I've been working on this and preparing for this. And one of the things that really stood out to me, and I think that's the whole theme of what we're going to be talking about here for the next hour, is database management versus component management. And I think that when we go through the three main objectives today, you're going to definitely see the difference between database management and component management. So first and foremost, just what we're going to do, we're going to do a very quick overview of database connectivity, just to make sure you understand what it is. So even though I'm going to do it specific to Altium, if you understand this connectivity, you pretty much understand database connectivity across the board, across not just PCBs, but also just anything in general that has to connect into a database. Secondly, we're going to talk about the typical flow that is used by a designer. And I think this one's really important because a lot of times we show an example of a resistor, and I will show that, but what happens when we're dealing with an IC or a part that the designer has to make? And I feel like that's where the flow really starts to break down, and we need to take a better look at that. And then lastly, we'll talk about our new product here called L9, and we'll show you those things that we feel help you handle component management versus database management. Now, I'm going to be talking about a whole lot today. If I can actually work a couple of questions, then I can, but right now, based on my time trials of this, I don't think I'm going to get to a Q&A. However, if you have any questions at any point in time, please do so. In addition to me speaking today, I have two of my colleagues who are kind of in the background, and one of which is very knowledgeable because he's the one who developed L9. So if there's some questions that you want to ask, just put those into the questions panel, and we can jump on, or they can jump on those as I'm discussing it. So, or discussing our webinar here today. Let's get on with it. I have two polling questions for you here, so we're going to push up the first question for you. Okay. And just kind of curious to know the audience I'm kind of dealing with over here in terms of whether you've seen a database or not, or if you've played with them or used them or fought with them. All right, so we're going to close the poll over here. So it looks like we've got a good scattering across there. Nothing specifically definitive, though. About a third of you are using the EDA tool library formats like the symbols and footprints, what we call the classic symbol-centric type libraries. Some of you are also using, a good percentage actually of you are using also certain databases like Access or SQL. So you actually already have some knowledge of a database here. And then there's also a lot of you who haven't used it for company purposes. And of course, there are those who are using some of the specific EDA products out there like the Vault. So there's a really good percentage of people coming from different backgrounds here. So hopefully what I'm going to present to you here today is going to be very useful to you regardless of where you're coming from here. I do have one other poll for you, and we're going to start that one here right now. So I know that your company's been using them. I'm just kind of curious if you've been using them yourself. Okay, so again, this is a little bit more interesting. So a lot of people have touched them or they are using them. So I'd say almost about 75% of you have actually worked with a database or at least played with it. The others, well, I shouldn't say that. Actually, 15% of you haven't touched it at all. So this will be a very good introduction. For many of us, it'll be a review, and then there's people out there who do the administration aspect of it, so it'll be interesting to see what you think about it once we're done with our webinar here today. All right, so let's get on to the good stuff. Thank you very much for answering those polling questions. Let's take a look over here. So let's talk about the database flow in general. Okay, the way this normally works is that you have Altium Designer, and you've probably seen this thing called a DB-lib. And the DB-lib really doesn't look like a whole lot because all it does is really provides a linkage from Altium into your database. So what is it linking to? Well, there is something that's called ODBC. And as you can see on the screen here, it is the Open Database Connectivity. So many, many years ago, if you remember, Unisys, IBM, those companies had proprietary systems. You had to work within their systems. There was no way for other programs to really work unless they had some type of deal with them. And back then, you had dedicated mainframes that did nothing but databases. And over time, they realized that, well, what good is that if you can't get programs to access your data? So over time, this thing called ODBC came about, and what the ODBC is just basically this capability. It's a driver. That's what it is. And the Microsoft operating system can store these drivers in there, And if you're using a particular database, they usually provide you an executable that will install the driver into this ODBC, which we'll call, let's say, a repository. And in fact, I'll show you what it looks like here in just a moment. And just for our purposes, rather than me talking to a bunch of PowerPoint slides, I'm going to kind of show this to you here in real time. But I did want to show you this particular flow. So I'm going to bail out of PowerPoint here. And let's take a look here at Altium Designer. And let's go through the motions of actually connecting up into an Access database. So I'm going to first start with an Access database. And the reason I want to start with Access is because it just shows you a raw database. So there's nothing really covering over it. There's no forms. There's nothing that may have been, things that have been put to kind of hide the database. When you're dealing with something like Access, you're just looking at the database. And that's what I want to spend some time talking about here for a few moments. So I've got a project up over here, and I'm going to bring in a new library. So I'm going to go to New Library, Database Library. And this is what you see over here. And again, it's not really glamorous because it's just a linking file. So what is it trying to link to? Well, it's those drivers, those ODBC drivers. So if you give me a moment here, I'm going to bring this up from my other screen here so you can see it. There it is. So this is something that what I'll call the utility itself is in existence in your operating system. And then as for these drivers, these are added in as you basically make use of different databases. So you can see I have access to Excel and access to Access. I think those are probably put in by default either by the operating system or through Microsoft Office. And then, of course, we do have the MySQL server because that's the basis or backbone for L9, which we'll talk about here a little bit later on in the webinar. But so these are my drivers, and this is the utility that basically maintains those drivers. That's what the DBlib is trying to gain access to. Now, Altium made it a little bit easier when it comes to Microsoft products. You can see that up here. So if I'm going to connect into an Access, I don't have to go into a whole lot of rigmarole of using this wizard. It's called a build wizard over here that would require me to basically say, okay, which driver, how's my connections, which tables I'm trying to connect in, does it have passwords and those kind of things. I don't have to worry about that because for this example, I'm using Microsoft Access. There are two different flavors. So there's Microsoft Access and then 2007. So anything that has the longer extension, if you remember, the old Access had .mdb, and then the newer one has .accdb, and that's what I'm going to be using here. So I'm going to click on that. And the only other thing that it really needs at this point is to know where it's at. So right now it's in the right location. So this is the one I'm going to use here. And we're going to spend a little bit of time in that database just to show you how it's set up as well. Then I got to connect into it. And this is a good sign. So what I'm seeing over here are all of what they call the fields, which we basically call parameters in Altium Designer. I also have two tables over here, which if you're familiar with Excel, and I'm going to start comparing Excel to Access because a lot of us already know Excel, and the concepts of database are very, very similar to Excel, but there are different naming conventions, and for good reason. But nevertheless, I'm going to use that. So what we would call sheets in Excel are basically tables, and we can see that for each one of these over here. So I have two tables, one of which has just components and one that's specific to resistors. If I want to see also just very quickly what's in it, and this is a good sign too, that it can read all the data, that's great as well. But the last thing I've got to do over here, and I have to do this for each one of these tables, is I have to do what's called a single key lookup. And this is not necessarily important when we're trying to put a part down. When we put a part down, it's being put down for the first time. It's for later on if we want to try to get data to match up with, let's say, with the database. We made changes to the database, and we want to update the information from the database into our components. So yes, Altium can talk to our database, but how does it know that the part that I've got in my schematic is able to talk to one of the rows that I've got, rows or records of information that I have about a component in my database? That's because we have to use this thing called a key field lookup. So in this case here, it has to be unique information. My particular example is called company part number, and I'll show this to you visually here in just a moment. And once we've got this, it fills in a little bit more information as to how it's going to handle parameters. And I don't want to go that deep into this today because I just want to show more of the flow than necessarily get into the nitty-gritty of this. But for what we've done, we've been able to tell Altium, hey, go find the ODBC driver for Microsoft Access. It was able to get into that particular file here. It's able to look up the information over here, and it knows that from now on, it's to use the company part number, this parameter that we'll have in there that has unique information so that when Altium ever has to do an update to that database, it can find that piece of information in that database. And we also have to do the same thing for the resistors as well. So that is our database that's linked up. I'm going to save this here, okay? And, well, let's just call this access here so we can find it, and you'll see why here in a moment. So access database, and we'll save this here. And you'll notice that in the libraries panel, this has now come up here. So if we want to take a look at it, here it is. So we've got actually two different databases. There's a database for the components and database for the resistors. All right, not sure what, oh, maybe because I didn't hook those up. But nevertheless, I think we did see some of these over here for these. Okay, why are we not seeing those? All right, let's take a look over here and see why we don't have them. So actually that brings up another really good point over here. Even though Access can see these here, probably one of the reasons why we don't have is because those files may not actually be in that directory. So in fact, let's take that from there and we'll work it through and show you what's going on. So yeah, Altium can see these. It provides me the information. Why is it not seeing the symbols? Why is it not seeing the footprints? Well, because in the database, and so what we're looking at now is Access, okay? And in Access, we have our records and we have our information. But we don't store our components in the database itself. And as a matter of fact, let me just kind of bring this up over here so that you guys can see it. Okay, I'm going to bring this one over here. So you can see the full thing. Let's do it from the current slide. We actually treat components and footprints a bit differently. So what we're most familiar with is what we call symbol-centric libraries. And why do we call them symbol-centric? Because everything gets attached to the symbol itself. So, and that's just the natural progression of any type of design if we're not doing a database. We go in, we do file new, we create a symbol, we have a graphical representation of it, but more importantly, what we do is we also provide all of the other information, like the model information, the parametric information, and so on and so forth over here. So we have everything that's attached to it. And as a matter of fact, and I think I've mentioned this before, but it's always kind of an interesting point to me, that many years ago, before Altium embedded the 3D into the footprint due to orientation issues, the 3D actually used to be connected directly to the symbol. That is how specifically they wanted everything to be symbol-centric. You used to put your 3D model, you still put your SPICE model. If you have an IBIS model, if you have footprint, all of those things get attached here to the symbol-centric version of it versus the database. And in the database over here, the symbol is just a graphic. And the best way to think about it, because I know most of us think of the symbol as having everything, but think of a footprint. The footprint really has no parameters other than the description. And now the symbol is going to act the exact same way. As a matter of fact here, you want to give it a very general name because you want to be able to reuse this symbol, this graphical representation, over and over again. So that's what we've got over here. So let's take a look at what we've got here in our database. So what does the database look like? Well, for those who are familiar with Excel, we have rows and columns. But in a database, we actually have what's called records and we have fields. And that's what you're seeing here, is that when I click over here on what we call a row, or this is actually a record. This is what represents the component itself. Okay? And what we see over here on the top are what we would normally call parameters or columns in Excel. Well, these are actually the fields. Okay? And that's what we're doing over here. So it's just basically a crisscross pattern of here is a row of information, and basically each one of these cells, based on the column it's located in here, corresponds to the different parameter that we have. So in this particular part that I happen to select, we have a company part number. Here's its manufacturer's name, its manufacturer's part number, its library symbol, and library reference. And this is what we got to go figure out, is why we're not seeing these here, but we'll get those to work here in short order. So I'm not too worried about that. Okay. And the same thing with the things with the footprint and the footprint name. And as a matter of fact, in Altium Designer, there's only 5 fields that you have to provide. You have to provide a unique field number, which we saw earlier, right? When we put the database library together, it needed to have it, okay? And so that was one of the things we gave it. But the other things that all we have to provide is a library path and library reference, which I really wish they'd call symbol path and symbol reference, but they called it library path and library reference, and those are actually fixed names. They're the ones you have to use. And within that, if you think about it, what do we have? We have its directory and we have its file name. We also have the library name itself. So whether you have a library that's got 1,000 parts or 1 part in it, it has to be this particular, it has to be given that particular name so it can find it in there. Same thing with the footprint, and we see that here. The rest of this stuff is just great information that ultimately needs to find its way into a bill of materials or to assist you into searching. Okay. Now, I did something kind of interesting over here. You'd probably never do this in a real database, but I wanted to show this as an example. I actually have these resistors listed twice. I have them once listed here in the components and once listed here in the resistors. One of the things that everybody would love to have is just one really, really large component table. Okay, they would just love to have that because then we don't have to worry about putting things into different tables, and that would be great. We forget something about components. If one component could do everything, we would only have one component type. But the fact is there's over 40 different component types out there in the market, and I'm just talking about major categories, not, I'm talking about something like a diode, which in a diode there's like 10 other subtype of diodes that are associated to the diode family, right? Same thing with capacitors, same things with resistors as well. So as a result of that, we have all these different categories with different characteristics. And what is specific to one particular component, like let's say the resistors over here, may not have any applicability to other things. So in the middle over here where you see all these blanks, those are all my ICs. So they're not really I'm not really interested in things like tolerances or values when I'm talking about an IC because it's not applicable to an IC. So if you're trying to do everything in one really large table, what's going to happen here is you're going to keep adding more and more columns to this, and this becomes very unwieldy. And as a result, you get a lot of blanks here, and then you got to keep scrolling to find things, and it just becomes a big mess. One thing you got to keep in mind, especially with something like Access, is it looks like Excel. And in certain ways, it acts like Excel, but there's a major difference. The major difference in Access, I'm reading and writing directly to the memory. Where in Excel, I'm actually dealing through the file system, so I can use a Control-Z. If I make a change to one of these blocks over here, there is no Control-Z because I've changed the memory out. So there's nothing that's going to remember those things. Also in Excel, I can grab a bunch of blocks, do a copy and paste, and manipulate the cells really easy. Here, it doesn't work that way, all right? Because under each one of these fields over here, there's information. So if I go into View, and I go into the Design View over here, every time we set up a table here, it wants to know what the field name is, right? This is my column, and what type of data, and even there's more information about controlling that information. One of the things, since I'm over here as well, there is what they call the key field. And in every database out there, it doesn't matter, Access or SQL Server, L9, even Vault, whatever system you are using, all databases have to have what's called a key field. And that is that unique piece of information that says, look, what differentiates this particular record from another record altogether is this one field that has unique information in it. And that's what you see over here in the components. So every one of these things is unique. As a matter of fact, if I try to put in another part that duplicates this, Access will scream at me and say, you can't have a duplicate in the key field. So, and the only reason why these resistors here and the exact same resistors are in different tables is because I actually gave them different key fields. Now again, would you normally do that in a database? The answer is no, okay? So what I want to do here, because I have to admit it's nagging me a little bit, is I want to see if we can get our libraries here so we can see everything up. So my database is telling me that, hey, look, you've created these things, and here you've got your library path, your library ref, your footprint, and your footprint ref. So it should be these particular libraries with these particular names in it. So let's go see where we are with this over here. So I'm going to right-click in this. I don't know if you know about this feature, but I've always liked it in Altium Designer. It's called Explore. So if you want to see where your file is and the main things of your database system, we can do that. So let's click on this over here. So I am in here as such, and now I know why this can't find it, because this here needed to be put into this over here. So let's see. So what we're going to do over here is we're going to save it to another location here, and we should be able to find it at that point. So let's go into here. We'll do a file save as. So we are into our webinar site here, and then we'll do database access here, and I will save it. And now we've got our parts, because that is where the location was. I basically told it when, let's go back over here as such. I said in the current directory where the dblib is, take a look for this file, and I had it one directory up. So I should have double-clicked in when I put that in there. But we were able to resolve that, and there it is. These are all my parts here for this file here. If I click on this one, here are my resistors as well. Okay, so hopefully that kind of gives you a pretty good overview of the flow and just the general gist of how this library all kinds of comes together. Now, one of the benefits of a database library, and I'll do this to the resistor, as I said, everybody does this because they want to show how cool it is to use a database library, is the ability to basically put information in here and create new parts without having to go into an SCH lib and doing a lot of work outside within Altium Designer. And that's what I'm going to do over here. Now, the reason I can do this is because I'm going to put in another part that's already using the exact same resistor symbol and is also using the exact same footprint as well. So the one that I'm going to use over here, so let's just type this in so you can see how this works out. So I'm going to do this 006. So I have my new part here. Again, I can't duplicate what I've got here. Now, I can do some copy and paste here, and this is actually something that's different in Microsoft Access as a side note. In the past, I would have had to right-click and do an edit. They've made it a little easier to copy and paste over here, but they still restrict it a great deal. So as a matter of fact, what I have found people do in the past is they're trying to start a database. They actually start in Excel first and then import it into Access because it's just a little bit easier to get it going in Excel first for the manipulation purposes. And then once they've got in Access, they build it off of that there. So that's what they've got. The part that I'm going to put in, and of course, I've got this written down over here. So this is a legitimate part. Okay. 682J, okay, and in this particular instance, I'm going to use the exact same library path and the exact same library reference. Okay, that's the power of the database when you have a discrete component that operates the exact same way. Okay, we'll talk about the other case when we don't, because I think that one gets neglected, but this is what we're doing over here, just to show that, hey, all I need to do is add a line in here, and voila, I'm done. Here, I'm going to try to keep to the standard as much as possible. This is a 6.8K. This is a 5%, and this is a 1/16 watt. Okay? And then over here on the description, okay, we'll do this a little bit here. I'm going to pull this out here just to make it a little easier to read. So again, similar to Excel, but it doesn't have as much of the flexibility as we've seen with Excel. So because again, it's a database here. So 6.8K. All right, we'll do 5%. And this actually translates to 62.5 milliwatts, and this is a 1005. And then for my data sheet over here, yes, I can certainly do that. One of the things you'll see here throughout this webinar today is Octopart. You'll see why here. Actually, not that one. Let's close that here. We're going to go into here, and let's bring up Octopart. And I'll type in this part over here again. So this was the RK73B1ETTP 682J. Hopefully type that right. And here's my part over here. And the reason I want this here is because I want to get to its data sheet, all right, which is always important. So I click on this here, and we'll grab this here, and I'll put that in. So to make it for completeness, let's do that here. Now, what about these other things that we have over here, like value? Doesn't this seem kind of redundant? Well, the reason why you want this information in here is it helps for sorting. So you always got to remember, what's the purpose of a library anyways? It's really for two purposes. First and foremost, to help your designers find things. And if there's more columns of information or specific columns of information, that really helps out, right? Even, by the way, the formatting, and I know we talked about this in prior webinars, if the formatting is not kept in a certain way, it can make it very problematic as well. But you want to make sure the formatting is there so that if you want to sort on this, and by the way, in this libraries panel here in Altium, they do a really great job of being able to sort on very specific things. So having this helps out tremendously. Okay, so it may be a little extra work, but it's well worth it here. The rest of this information, I'm just going to drop in over here, and just happen to know it here because I've gone through this a few times just to make sure, and we'll just keep this moving along. So I have a new part. And because everything is all in there, including the information for the symbol and the footprint, if I go back over here to resistors and I refresh all, okay, let's go back here to resistors, you'll now see my new part over here. In fact, I'll drop it down so you can see it in the list. All right? And if we go over here to drop it down in the schematic, we'll see all the information that dropped in there. So I never once went into a schematic library to create this because the information's already there. So when it comes to discretes, if you've already got a discrete component, and if you already have a footprint that will fit the bill, then this works out fine. Okay, and there it is. Everything I typed in is all in there, and that part is good to go. Now, let's get to the stuff that really causes us a lot of grief and consternation. Let's talk about the situation where you've got designers. And I've been in a company, just to kind of give you a preview, where they actually did have a full-time librarian, and they actually had a tool. It was called BoardStation. It was a very old version of it. This is many years ago. It was back in the tool itself was from the early 1990s. And BoardStation allowed the librarian to lock out people from the libraries. And in this company, they probably needed to do so because they had between 50 to 100 people trying to hit that library at any given time. So they did that for a reason. But here's the problem with that. Even though at one point that library group had, I believe, a dozen component engineers who that's what they did all day long, is they made library component parts. I was on the test side, not on the product side. And as a result, they always gave priority to the product, but they didn't give any priority to my stuff because it was considered to be test, even though the product was never going to go out the door until it got tested anyway. So, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? But the fact of the matter is they always gave priority to the product folks first. And it got to the point that even with a dozen of them, anytime I submitted something in, it was about 3 to 4 weeks to get it back. And after I did that once, and I found that it took me 3 months to get a project through basically through the entire company process, I actually went to what they call spec to design, meaning I would just spec it out and then hand it to some outside company and do it because I just couldn't get it through our company's process fast enough. So the idea of having just a librarian control all of this stuff is noble. It's great, and if you can do it, that's phenomenal. But more often than not, we've got designers who are more than happy to keep themselves moving forward by helping or assisting with the creation of components. And that is what we want to do, is we want to tap that additional resource. And that's what I'm going to show here today, because they're going to move forward. And what I have found, especially with Altium and these other systems that allow a designer to have access to the library, if the database system is too unwieldy or is too restrictive, they're going to create their own local stuff and said, you know what, I'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission at this point, and that's what they're going to do. So let's go through the process that most designers are going to go through to get their job done. What I have here is there's a part that I want, and it's not in either one of these here. So it's called the MC, and I can type it in here. So it's the which one it is, 33269DT, and I don't have it in this database here, so I want to add this in, at least into my project. Later on, I want to get into the database. So what I've done, and of course, I'm a little pressed for time because I would have gone through the process of showing you that I've designed this here. Okay, so I went through the process of designing the symbol, and I've also designed its footprint as well. I've designed these specifically in separate libraries because I do want to get this into the database at some point in time. Okay. And if there is an administrator, it doesn't have to be a full-time librarian, but even if there's an administrator who's going to take this stuff and put it into some type of master library, then it makes it a lot easier for me to give them the individual files than it is for me to throw a big old file with 100 components in and tell them to go search for it, all right, or her to go search for it. So that's what I'm doing over here, is I've created these two parts, and now I want to make use of them. So normally what happens with this is we say, okay, well, I created the part and I want to use it now, and I'll get it into the database library a little bit later on. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to place it. And let's just change this up over here, but also look at its properties as well. So these properties look a lot like those things we do for a symbol-centric library. But purposely, what I did on purpose for the description and also for the comment over here is I didn't want to put too much information here because I expect the database to take care of that later on. I've also put in the manufacturer's name, manufacturer's part number here for several reasons. One of the reasons too, of course, is that if I'm keeping this local and then later on I do need to go do a reconciling with the database, I can at least remind myself of where, what company it was and the part number, so I have a fighting chance at this. It would probably also help if I actually even added the database, the link to the data sheet as well in this. And for those purposes, I also have my model here. And that's another thing I would encourage people to do. Yes, you can get a symbol in there, and the database will work just fine without a footprint. It just needs to have a symbol at least to get going. But at some point, you're going to have to create that footprint anyways. And so it's a really good practice to do both of them when you're putting everything together, right? It's really going to be a complete package rather than do one for now and do the other one for later when you're feeling just as rushed. So I'm okay with this over here. I'm going to press this in, and I'm going to place this in over here. But one last thing I'll mention. So again, notice this is coming from the SCH lib here. So how do we get it back into the database? Well, we're going to do kind of very similar to what we did here with the component. So we're going to go into the resistor. We're going to go into the component here, and I'm going to add some stuff in. Now, typically a designer, and I'm just as guilty as anybody else, we're in a rush. So as a result of that, you're going to see a few things here. So bear with me. You will see things that you probably don't like, but you'll see why I'm doing them here in a reason. Okay, so I'm going to give it a unique company part number. I'm going to give it its name, okay, and the manufacturer's number. So let's see, we're going to do this here. This is going to be slightly different. This one I do have to do at least properly, or it won't see the light of day over here. So we'll have to make sure that was done right. So let's make sure we get the names of this properly. So let's do again here. Let's do an explore. Make sure it's in the right location here. We are in our database here, and I do see it. So let's grab this here. Okay. Control C. And then also I want to make sure the library name is the same as well. So it's the M3. Okay, so we have the name, because if we don't, then I'm going to spend a couple minutes trying to figure out the links over there. And that's one thing that's really important, is you want to get this right. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. So, or we're going to have to spend time on that, and I really don't have the time to do it. And I want to make sure we do it right the first time. So we'll do this again. This is an MC33269DT. And then for the footprint, it's actually the same thing. It's just that it's a PCB lib file. So we'll change that over here as such. Now the name of it is a little bit different, so I do need to open it. Give me a moment here. Yeah, let's go to PCB library and grab its name. Okay, we got that over here. I'm going to press OK, and then let's go back to our Access database here, and we'll put that in there as such. Now the comment. And this kind of, again, is what happens quite often with people when they start seeing this database stuff like, oh, and I got to put a comment in here. Well, what do they do in the past? So let's take a look at that, and they'll say, all right, so this is power, and then here's MC33269DT, and then, okay, well, let's see what else they put in there. Well, that seems to be good enough for this one. Then they look at the description and are like, oh, they changed up the description over here. It's something slightly different, so they got to put a comment in there. We'll spell it out in power this time. Right, and then MC33269, comma, and then I guess this is an adjustable regulator, so we'll put that in there. And then as you kind of look further on, and you get to the point where it's like, I don't even want to fill this stuff out anymore. I got enough information in here. So the point I'm trying to make over here is that the information I put in should work. Okay, in fact, let's give it a go and see if it actually shows up at this point. See if we got it right. Okay, so if we go in here and we go back into our where's our database library? Okay, there it is. There's our database library here. And if I update it, let's do a refresh all over here under the components. It should be, there it is. There's my component over here as such. So the point is that did it work? The answer is yes. Okay, there's the component, and I can place that component over here, and let's take a look at it. Just that I left the database in a mess. So you can see the information that got put in over here. All right, and that did pick up the footprint here, but notice it's coming from the DB lib. So all of this is all good to go, and it even picked up the comment that I put in there as well. Right, but that's the problem, is that when we go back over here and we look at this, I left it as a mess. And the bigger question is, who's going to validate this? Who's going to clean this type of thing up? Now, if there's somebody who's always doing that, that's fine. But what I have found in most organizations is that this stuff is probably not going to be maintained because everybody's contributing to it, and whoever is quote unquote the librarian, that's not their full-time position, and they've got their work to be done. So will they get back to this? Hopefully they will, but usually it's under a pressured situation where now they've got a bill of materials that needs to be cleaned up, or worse, something did not go well and there's a respin, and now they're investigating why there was a respin done with it. There was a number of things I did over here on purpose, like for example, you'll notice over here that the unique ID, or this what they call the key field over here, it worked just fine because I gave it a unique number, but it's not following the conventions that we have over here. Same thing with the manufacturer's name. Now in this case, I just shorten it. But what happens when someone puts Texas Instruments in there versus someone who puts TI in there? Well, now you've kind of hindered the search capabilities, because I have to be smart enough to know to look for different ways of people representing companies in there. The library symbol, path, and ref, I can't get around that. If I don't do it right, I just won't see it. So at least those are somewhat protected. And then when you get to the comment and the description as well, that gets a little bit sloppy. And of course, if I don't fill in the rest of this stuff, well, who's going to fill it in at some point in time? So this now becomes not a component management problem. This becomes a database management problem. And that kind of leads us over here to our poll. I'm kind of curious to know about what you felt about this. Does this seem, is this something that you're like, you know what, I expect this, or is this too much of a hassle? So that's what we're calling the particular poll the hassle poll. So take a look there, and if you take a moment to provide your input, right, I'll be kind of curious to see what you got. All right, so we're going to close the poll over here so you can hopefully see these results here. So 33% said, yeah, this works. And you know what? It does. If you got a small organization and you don't have a lot of budget and you got somebody who's willing to play the role of librarian, this will work. And hopefully everybody will respect the way that this type of system will work. A good portion of you, about 40% of you, said, well, this is okay, and maybe even better than what you currently have right now. And then about a little over 25% of you are kind of using this fair or poor thing. It just seems like it's a lot of work. And you're right, it really is a lot of work. And you have to remember, I've glossed this over because I've run through this many, many times. So I already know what to kind of put in there. But if I was to have to put this in as a brand new part and I was trying to do this stuff over here, I'd probably be about 10 times slower. And I certainly would get much more frustrated. I'm not even sure I'd even get to the component and the description at that point in time. So what I want to show you at this point is another way of doing it. So one of the things we realized here at 9.connects is that library management is very, very problematic for a lot of people. And that's why I want to take it from over here and show you as well. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to just push access aside here for just a moment. And what I'm going to do over here is, let's just imagine for a moment, I have now created my two components here, but instead of putting them in the access database, what I'm going to do at this point in time is I'm actually going to put them into the L9. So let me bring up L9 over here, and you guys can take a look at it here. Let's bring up L9 here. So this is L9. Now, I am doing this from San Diego into a server that's sitting in Austin, Texas. This is not an online service. This is something that you would install, and you'd put it on your company's server. And shoot, if you want it on your own laptop, you can do it as well. The only reason I'm doing it here today online is to show that it's capable of doing that, but plus Tim is also in the background over here, and he's going to assist me, because you'll see why I'll need a little bit of his assistance over here in just a moment. So the L9 is basically trying to handle the database elements for you so that you can focus on the component management. So on the front page here, and this is the main page that we've got, you can see the different categories, and we can add categories all day long to this. Now, there are 3 different levels of administration. There is an administrator who can create those categories and the parameters that are supposed to go with those categories. There's a librarian who can do what's called validation, and you'll see why here in just a moment. And there's a user who can just put the information in and make use of that information immediately. And as a matter of fact, I'm actually logged in under the user. So there's no tricks I can play over here. I'm not an administrator. I'm not a librarian. I cannot validate a part, and I cannot add categories in it, because I wanted to show you what I can do just as a user. So let's take that same part and let's add it in to this particular category called IC. So you can see that we already have a bunch of ICs in here. They're the exact same ones you saw in the Access database. So I brought those in over here. Here's the key thing, and this is one I think is the most important things that's missing from a general database, is a status. And what this status indicates is that this part has not only been placed in there, it has been validated and is ready to go. Okay, so that's what you're seeing over here. That's the most important part of it. But what we're trying to do too is that what we have found, and where most databases or just libraries in general have failed or just become very problematic, is what we call the point of entry. If the point of entry is not made so that you can readily make use of it, then that's when all the problems begin, because those errors that you introduce into a database, if they're not caught sooner than later, then other people use it, and other people take that information and they assume that it's okay. So there has to be some type of validation over there, and the information really has to be correct to begin with. So that's what we're trying to do with this. So I'm going to add this part in. So I'm going to click over here. Now notice I can add things in here through a manual fill, but that's not what I want to do with this. I actually want to take the MC33269DT and put it in here. But what's also important about this is I want to make sure that I have the right number, because if I put in what you're going to find about the part I want to use, okay, let's jump over here and let's go back to Octopart. So I'm going to put this in here. So MC33269DT. What you're going to find is there's a number of different flavors of this DT part. Okay, so actually what the information I put into Access is not complete, because if I sent that over as a bill of materials, they'd be like, well, which one do you want over here? And there's a very specific one I want. I want actually the one that's adjustable, and that's this particular part over here. So that's what this is looking for, is it wants a very specific part, and if you give it a specific part and you tell it to get the values, it fills everything in for you here. Here's the key part that I really like about this. Like, for example, and it's amazing to me how many people have problems with this, especially if they're using an Excel sheet to manage this. If you have to have a unique company part number, this automatically handles that for you. And then it's also providing you the rest of this information that it's already filling in as well. Now, for what I need to do, this is great because all the information is there. If I'm not happy with the symbols here, and of course I'm not happy with this one, I want to change this over here, but I'm going to tell it that I want a different symbol here, and it's a matter of me just typing it in. So I'm going to type this in. Now, again, obviously it's already there because of the fact that I've gone through the motions of this a few times. It's not in the system, we have removed it, but it does remember those things from those things that have been typed in. So I can give it its symbol. It's also going to ask for the footprint over here as well. It just wants a name. I don't necessarily want to use DPAC for this, so let me go grab the other one that we've got here in our from Access. I'll just grab it from Access actually, since it happens to be there. But I could grab it from the library as well. So let's go back over here and grab that name. So let's go here to Components. This is it over here, and this is the actual name of it. So I want to make sure that's in there. Do a Control C on that. It's a little bit of cheating there, but rather than me trying to type this in for sake of time here, so I'll put that in. The rest of it I'm going to leave, and I'm going to submit add. So what happens once I've submitted this in? Well, you'll see here in just a minute. First and foremost, it comes up, says, look, the part's been added. But notice how it's been added. It's now been added with an exclamation point, and what the exclamation point is saying, like, look, I've added this in, but this still needs verification. And that is what's really important about this, is that somebody else needs to put another pair of eyes on this. And as a matter of fact, not only is that over here, in the top right corner, you'll see a little bell with a number on it. We purposely did that because if you want to see what parts you've submitted, you can do that as well. Because if you submitted some from resistors and some in the ICs and some in diodes, it would be a little bit difficult to see those in the categories, especially when other people are contributing. What this is showing you over here is your list of those things that you have submitted. And if I need to make a few more changes to it, I certainly can do that. But this has now been submitted so that Tim, who's actually also online as an administrator, can take this and he can actually review it and then give it its approval. Now, what about the two files? I got to upload those as well. And unfortunately, because Alteam is using proprietary information, I do have to submit those separately. They are placed into a specific location so the librarian can take those, review them, and then add them to the master libraries. Okay, so I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to upload these two files here right now. So let's bring those on up over here. So again, I'm going to call this MC33269, and I'm also going to put my name on it as well. So I can give it whatever label I want, and again, this helps the librarian or whoever's going to validate this know what this file is coming from. So I'm going to browse it over here. Okay, let's jump into that here really quick here. Let's go into our webinar, database libraries. And here is my schematic part. Let's call this SCH. I'll copy this so I can use this again. And I'll update this one. All right, and then I'll upload the other folder here. So this is going to be the PCB. And we'll browse this one. And we'll grab the PCB one here, and we'll press open. And then I'll upload this one as well. So these have now been uploaded over here, and that's what Tim is going to do, is in the background, he's going to take this, put this information in here, add it to the master library. So let me go over here, and we'll see if he's, actually, all I need is click on this big icon here, and we'll see if he's already made that change here. So if I click on this, you can now see that it has indeed been changed. So he has verified this here. So that's what we've got here. And in the meantime, he's also added these into the master library as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to download this master library. So there's two ways we can do this. Once those master libraries have been put together, I can go into the download area here, okay, and you can see there's a lot of things we set up for downloads on purpose so that if there's assistance in at least getting L9 working, or assistance in getting your manuals, or just doing some uploads of, like, if you want to import a bunch of components at the same time, we have an import feature capability in there, and so on and so forth. But what I need to do now is I need to download these master files here, and that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to click on this. The point I wanted to make is that it can be done two different ways. One of the ways is that if you want to put it on a shared network where those master libraries are going to reside, that's great. But if you have a lot of network latencies, you can also download these directly to your local machine. So if you have to go offline, or there's just a lot of network latencies, whatever the reason is, you can just constantly go here and pull those things down, and you'll always get a copy of the master files. So that's what we've got here. So let's do a file save as, make sure I get to save them in the right location here. As a matter of fact, since it's offering me this, let's put them in the right location here. So let's go under here, user online. So you can see that these are, this one over here is going to stomp on my last one, so I'll say yes. And then once I'm done with that, I'm going to click on this one over here, and we'll do a save as, and this will be the schematic one. and it'll stomp on the old one as well. So now I've got that in here. And the key thing, and this is what we want to show you, is that because this has all been set up and it's all good to go, I should be able to get into this without any issues. So if I go here and I right click, and you can see that this is what I've got from my L9. And by the way, it's 9 because it's or NIN because it's 9.connects, and that's the name we gave it from the company. That's the first 3 letters. That's why it shows that. I'm going to click on the IC over here, and we should now have our component MC, and there it is. Okay, and again, this is coming down from the Austin server. So Altium is actually using the ODBC driver to get to the SQL, which in turn is hitting the Austin server, pulling the information through, and then it knows where those parts are local to my drive, and it's pulling it in. Okay, and just place the part down so you can see it. We've got it over here. Okay. The last thing I wanted to mention to you is that, let's say, for instance, I have my part over here. I've now pushed this into L9. If I want to get the L9 to connect into my local part, that's not a problem. I don't have to delete this one and say, hey, you know what? I don't want to use this one. I want to use this one instead. You can do that, but more often than not, if this is not being done in near real time, and there's been some lag time between maybe some modifications you've made to this and the new one, that's not a problem, and I'll show you that here right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Tools, and I'm going to go into Update from Libraries. I could do Update Parameters from Database. That's another discussion about DB link files, which I don't want to get into here today, but I can certainly do the Update from Libraries. So you can see I've got both of my parts over here. One is local, and here's this other one over here that did come from the local, that did come from the database itself. I don't want to change that one, but you know what? I'll change the one that came from Access, and I will change the one that also came in that I had local over here just to change it up. If you're not familiar with this, let me give you a very brief overview of it. If I leave this like this, it basically can say change everything. Okay, and I can do that in this case if I didn't. If, say, for instance, I don't want it to change everything because I made some changes to the graphical, I can do that where I can say, look, just update the parameters and models, but leave the graphical attributes alone. But since this is pretty new, I'm just going to do a full replacement of it. So I'm going to press Next over here. I want to replace both of these. Unfortunately, I do have to do this one at a time, which is a little unfortunate, but I'm going to choose Component. Not that difficult to change here. My component's on the very top, and I don't want to use you. I want to use you. So I'm going to go into go into the one that's the category for the ICs in the L9 directory over here. So let's pull that one up. So there's that part here. I'm going to press OK. And the same thing for this one here. I'm going to add this one in here as well. Okay, so let's go back into this one. Let's go into the ICs. And let's click on this one. We'll press this here. So both of these are now, I'm telling Altium, replace it with the stuff that's now in the L9 library. And it's L9, pardon me. I'm going to press Finish. I'm going to execute the changes. I'm going to press Close. So now if I go into this, for example, this one over here, you can see that this was all the information that came from the L9. And there it is. Okay, all the information that was stored over there. And again, remember, I didn't type any of this stuff in over here. That was pulled in from me putting that number in, the proper number in, and having it search all that information. Okay, so that all the information got pulled in due to that over here. So that was this part over here, and I believe this was the other part as well. So all of these now are pointing to the L9. Okay. So that's what we've got over here. I do have another polling question for you. Now that you've seen L9, I'm just kind of curious what you think of it. So we're going to open that up here for you. All right, so we're going to close it over here. So a good portion of you seem to be interested in this, and there's also actually about 25% of you that may be happy with what you already have. And I think that's just fine too, because if you are happy with what you have, that means you have something that is right for you. And I think that's good, because it's really rare that we come across people who say, we love our libraries, but if you've got something that's working, that's great. The point I want to make over here is that, sure, if you're interested in L9, we're more than happy to have that discussion with you. But at the end of the day, again, we want you to focus on component management and not database management. And if you're spending more time in database management than component management, you're spending a lot of time that is not being fruitfully spent. So that's what we wanted to kind of drive that point home with you. So what I want to do over here is just kind of talk a little bit more about 9.connects. We know that you're here for a reason, right? You're curious about databases, or you fought your battle with databases, or you're just kind of curious about this new thing we call L9. So we're glad that you spent the time with us to take a look at it here. What about us here at 9.connects? Well, a lot of us actually spend a tremendous amount of time in the library area. So what do we provide here at 9.connects? We provide various trainings. We have a one-day Altium training. So if you just want to brush up on your Altium and just, hey, how do I get through the footprints and the symbols with a little more efficiency, we can certainly do that. We also have a library management training. This is a one-day training where we go into a little more of the workflow. This is really great for those companies. It's not really great for a lot of individual people who are doing different things at different companies. It's great if you have a company and you want to try to get everybody together and you kind of want to have a referee. That's when the library management training makes really good sense. We also are going to be putting out a 2-day spec ops on library. We want to get into those things that people forget are in there, or the capabilities that they're in there, or to talk about situations that get kind of sticky. For example, if you got some really weird type of footprint, how do you handle those things if you got some really odd shapes, or if you want to use something that used to be a part of a polygon pour and you want to bring it in and now you want to make it a pad? There's a lot of those type of things that people want to know about, and that's what we're going to be doing here in our 2-day spec ops library. What about services, configuration assistance, helping people try to figure out their flow? Especially you can do that now that we have this tool L9. But more importantly, and one thing we've done quite a bit for a lot of people is library scrubbing. They give us a whole list of parts and saying, can you just please clean up our libraries? And we have done our fair share of those things as well. And of course, now we also can provide L9. So what is this L9 thing about? If you're interested in it, it's basically currently available for purchase. So if you're interested in it, we can certainly have the discussion with you on that. There's basically it comes for a license, and then it comes with the software. When it comes to the license, it's look, you put it on your server, it's licensed. Whoever needs to get a name and an access, and as long as they have a browser, they can get to that particular server, they're good to go. So whether it's going to be 3 people or 100 people, it doesn't matter. You pay for one license, okay? So it's not like you got to pay for a server and then you got to pay for different client seats. We're not playing that game. The training, we do provide training, and that is a part of the cost as well, because what we found is a lot of times you get dumped with a database, and then as you saw with Access, you can set it up all great, and it works just fine, but if you don't have a flow in place, it's just going to turn into mush. So we want to make sure that you not only understand the L9, but you also understand the methodology, or basically make sure that the workflow is going to work for you, that everybody agrees to that workflow and that they all know how to use it. And it also will come with the first-year maintenance as well, because there's a lot of really cool features that we're talking about and putting in there. And since we're very close to the designer and the development of this particular tool over here, we've been really feeding them a ton of input, but we also know that our customers are going to have a lot of input too. So there are going to be some really great things that are coming up that over time that we're just going to continually add to this here. Now, in terms of the collateral release date, what we mean by that is the actual date in which we can get you the software and license all those things is June 29th, but we can certainly have the discussion about the product if you are interested in it sooner, and we can go through the, demo it and help you guys with that decision-making process. But June 29th is the date that we will release everything and get it out there for use. So with that, okay, my hour